here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by guitarist, songwriter, and more recently also vocalist Mike Baggetta of power trio mssv, Main Steam Stop Valve. The band that he fronts alongside Mike Watt, famously of Minutemen, fIREHOSE, Porno For Pyros, Stooges, various other projects, as well as Stephen Hodges on drums, who has played for many years with Tom Waits and has played with David Lynch, amongst other projects. mssv are soon going to be putting out their third full-length record, On and On, via Big Ego Records. mssv classify themselves as post-genre music, which doesn't really give you much idea of what the music sounds like. But if you consider some of the other projects of Mike Watt and Stephen Hodges, it maybe gives you an idea of the kind of world that we're in here. Guitars, bass, drums, a little bit avant-garde, bit kind of alternative rock, a bit jazzy, very cool stuff. Yeah, I don't know what genre to call it, but I guess sometimes you don't have to give any genre classification to a band, and therefore post-genre. The band has got an extensive tour coming up, first in the US, where they're going to be playing 50-odd dates, and then they're going to be coming to Europe, and they're going to be coming to Scotland. And not only are they going to be coming to Glasgow, where I am right now, but they're also going to be coming to Aberdeen, where I went to school, up in the north of Scotland. And so really, I figured, what better reason do I have for going up north to visit my old stomping ground than to go see the band twice? So that is my intention. I'm going to go see them in Glasgow. I'm going to go see them in Aberdeen. If you're somewhere in North America or around in Europe, there are plenty of opportunities to see them too. I'm going to play the title track, On and On, which is the only track so far which is available to listen to, with the album coming out on the 7th of March. You can check out the band either on Mike Baggetta's website, which is mikebaggetta.com. You can also go to the mssv website, which is mainsteamstopvalve.com. Both websites link to each other. You can get links to all various social media, to their Bandcamp page to buy the latest record and listen to other music by the band. You can watch videos, all kinds of cool stuff to find there. And if you want to follow me, I am on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can see what I'm doing musically at tomosmansounds.com. I don't think there's anything else to be said at this point. So, without further ado, Mike Baggetta of mssv, take it away.
Spend a life wondering just what to do. I wanna try my best, see what I can do.
Hey Tom,
Mike, hello.
how you doing?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for joining me.
No,
Well, actually, no, what time is it where you are?
it's 2 p.m.
And so I was kind of looking a bit into your history. It seems like, similar to me, you've moved around quite a lot in your life.
Oh yeah.
So whereabouts do you actually consider to be home these days?
Well, right now I live in Gainesville, Florida, which is north central Florida. Um, but I haven't really gone too crazy. I've just been sort of like moving down the East Coast. I'm from Western Massachusetts, then I lived in New York City, then I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and now I'm down in Gainesville.
Oh, okay. So it was kind of like a natural progression.
Yeah, literally going downhill.
Yeah. So where can you go after Florida?
Maybe Havana would be nice.
All right. Yeah, that would be an interesting move.
We'll see.
So we are mostly here to talk about your latest or your forthcoming album with mssv, On and On, which is your third full-length album, I believe,
Yep.
with Mike Watt and with Stephen Hodges,
Yep.
well-known, well-respected players. I think actually when you started mssv, it wasn't with Stephen Hodges. Is that right? Or you started under a different name?
No, it's always been with Steven.
Oh, okay.
Me and Watt did an album with a drummer named Jim Keltner called Wall of Flowers, and we recorded that in 2017. And when it came out in 2019, I wanted to do some shows. I wanted to tour a little bit when the record came out, and Watt was down, but Jim wasn't really traveling at that point. So I asked Watt if he thought maybe I should ask Hodge, who I didn't know at all. I just knew him from well, all the records we know Hodges from, the Tom Waits stuff and the David
Yeah.
Lynch stuff but for me, mainly it was Watt's first opera, Contemplating the Engine Room. That's where I knew Hodge from the most. That record that he did with Hodge and our buddy Nels Klein on guitar. And so I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if Stephen would want to play some of this music and then we'll see what happens. And so we did 10 shows coast to coast in 10 days, me and Watt and Hodges. And about halfway through, we were doing some music based on Wall of Flowers, a couple of my songs from Wall of Flowers. But then we did a couple of songs of Watt's from Contemplating the Engine Room. Hodge brought in the Pink Room that he did with David Lynch for the Fire Walk with Me soundtrack, and then we did a couple of other things. We did some Stooges and stuff like that. And about halfway through the trip, I think at some point in one of the van rides, I was saying, maybe this is already so different from what the record was. Of course, you change one person and things change.
Mm.
And I didn't know it was going to be a band. We didn't know there wasn't a name. We were just sort of doing these shows around the record. And about halfway through the tour, I asked, would you guys want to try some totally different music based on, this sound, which is different? And they were into it. And Watt came up with the band name. And later that year in 2019, I booked maybe a week of shows in California because I had written a bunch of music and we played that music for a week. And then we recorded the first Main Steam Stop Valve album after that. Though there was a live album that came out first on Striped Light Records, and that was the first Main Steam Stop Valve titled thing, and that was music that was recorded on that first tour that I was just talking about.
And you mentioned that it was Mike that came up with the well, with Mike Watt, I should say, seeing as your two mics. By the way, do you have special names for each other so it's not just Mike and Mike?
I'm Mike and he's Watt. That way
Oh, he's
we
Watt. Okay, that's
yep,
straightforward.
yep, easy.
So you said that he came up with the band name. So I was going to
Yeah.
ask you, what is a main steam stop valve? Is that
As
just
far as I understand it, it's kind of like one of the main parts of a ship that keeps the motor running, like a steam engine running.
ah,
Um, yeah, you can close it for more pressure or open it for less pressure. Maybe this backwards. Obviously, I'm not an engineer. The title comes from the movie version of The Sand Pebbles, which is a book by Richard McKenna. But in the movie version with Steve McQueen, they talk about the main steam stop valve.
okay. So it really does have a specific origin.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
And yeah, so like I want to get into a bit of history of yourself and the band, but also to talk about the album a bit. I I struggle as a music writer. I often struggle to come up with genres or to explain bands by genre, particularly when I'm listening to interesting and creative bands. So I was intrigued by the fact that I've seen MSSV described as post-genre. So how do you kind of think of the music that you're playing? Like you said that when you started this project, you said to Mike and Stephen Hodges that this was going to be something totally different from what you'd done before. So how did you sort of visualize it musically?
Well, I don't think about it that way, but when I was writing music for that band or this band, which is MSSV, I write the music because I know who's going to play it. Like, and
Hmm.
so I've been listening to Stevens drums for decades. I've been listening to Watt's voice and bass and songwriting for decades at this point, like many of us. So you have a sound kind of in your ear about what you think those people sound like. But then it's kind of your own take on it because it's your ears, right? Which are connected to your own brain, not somebody else's. So it's like, yeah, I think that they kind of have these qualities in their playing, but some of that is based on my interpretation of what I'm hearing when they play it. So
Yeah.
when I write a bass part or a drum part for these songs, I'm thinking about maybe what I think they're they've been capable of, or what I'd like to kind of push them to try based on knowing their sound and just the selfish reason of like, boy, I'd sure love to hear these guys play this type of a thing because maybe I haven't really heard them do it before.
Mm.
So a lot of it is just kind of writing what I would like to hear those two guys play. If I play this music with other people, it takes on a whole different sound and a whole different life and a whole different thing. It's not that sound anymore, which can be cool. I mean, different sounds are great, and that's why people have different bands and there's different bands out there. But for me, it's really about putting what I do with what I think they do or trying to get them to do different things that could go with something I'm trying to do also. But it's about the three personalities really more than, you know, a certain type of music.
Yeah. And how much do you go into writing these songs thinking specifically about, like drum patterns or bass lines that you want to hear versus kind of going, well, I sort of have an idea of the sort of thing they're likely to play. I'm going to set up the parameters and then see what they do.
So far, it's been pretty much I'd write the parts. I'd write the drum part and I'd figure out how to put the bass part so that they kind of go with each other so that they make one part.
Mm.
Um, and then inevitably, those guys have way better ideas than me for that stuff. So we'll get together and do practice and things change. Oh, what if I put the kick
Mm.
drum here? Or what if I leave out this note on the bass? Or what if I don't play this part? And it creates more space and the drums do something to fill in for that, or it leaves it open. And then, oh, maybe I can play this chord differently when that happens. So that's for me the really cool part to get to. I mean, it's good to go in with something. Here's an idea to start with.
Mm.
But the best stuff is when it changes because those aren't really my ideas. I'm limited to only what I can think of. But when you get other people involved, the limitations go away because other people start to bring in different ideas. And if you're the type of band leader or composer that's open to that, I think you end up with a end result that's like way better than anything you could come up with on your own.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like from listening to your music and from hearing you talk about the construction of the songs, I'm sort of curious how much improvisation is involved. Because on the one hand, when I listen to your music, I think, well, I can I can see that there would be room for improvisation. And I think you came from a sort of a jazz guitar background. But on the other hand, like with a track like I think it was Tiny Pipes, the way that you play the guitar on that, it sounds like it's very loose, but you repeat it exactly the same every single time. So that made me wonder, oh, this is like, it's like pretending to be loose, but actually it's very precise, or it seems to me anyway.
Well, that part, the thing that you're feeling and thinking is my favorite stuff about music. When people can listen to something and they don't really know what it is. Is
Mm,
it written? Is it improvised? Is it supposed to be this way? Is it do these guys know how to play their instruments or not? I like that. I love that kind of space between like dreaming and awake where you're not really sure what's happening.
yeah.
Uh, you know.
So is that a gentle way of saying you'd rather not say how much is improvised?
I don't want to take that feeling away from you.
Okay, no, I like that. Um, just off on a tangent, have you had the opportunity to meet Tom Waits?
No, I've never met him.
And so I'm not actually sure if Stephen still plays with him, does he?
I don't think he's done anything with him in a little while, but you'd have to ask him. I I would guess not since I've known him, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I
I
guess
don't
Tom
know.
Waits hasn't released a studio album for a little while anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Now, so MSSV started in 2019, is that right?
Yeah.
And so it seems like you started out quite intent on playing a decent number of shows. And I've seen more recently that you had like a 56 or 58 date tour in 2023, and you've got quite a big tour coming up in 2025. And then obviously in between all of that, we have the void that was COVID. So how much of an impact did that have on you and on the band? Because I understand that you did some, in fact, I've listened to some of the recordings that you did during lockdown. So yeah, what kind of impact did that have on you?
Yeah, we were gonna do a tour in 2020, right? Wow, it's like I don't even remember it anymore. Yeah, in 2020, and that we had to postpone that, but that was the tour we ended up doing in 2022. So 2 years later, we were able to be one of the first bands out on the road to sort of see what was going on for everybody, and it ended up being basically cool. But the good thing was, like you mentioned, we figured out a way to keep working. Like
Mm,
it's so easy to record certain types of things on your own at home with just like very basic amount of technology. You have a laptop and you have a audio interface. You can pretty much record a lot of good sounding stuff now, even whatever it was 3 or 4 years ago. So I wrote a few songs and we had the opportunity to make a bunch of 7 inches. And it was
mm,
just kind of a way to keep everybody having something to do, like we could still work on music, we could still communicate as a band, we could still help out some friends that had record labels, we could help out people that wanted to hear new music and see something interesting, when everybody's sort of chilling out. So we had a really good way down to work some of that stuff out. So we ended up doing a 7 inch for an Italian label,
mm,
improved sequence. We did a 7 inch for my friends at Strike Light Records in Knoxville. That was the MSSV meets Nels Klein record where I wrote a song and Nels joined us, and then Nels wrote a song for us and joined us on that. And then we did another 7 inch called the Scott Eicher EP, where our buddy Scott Eicher, amazing cartoonist, graphic
mm.
artist.
No, yeah, the cover art for that is really cool.
Yeah, so he made 4 panels of those kind of trippy looking characters. And so he gave us these 4 panels to use for the idea. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So in my head, I sort of made a storyline about these 4 characters, like a little movie script. Here's what's happening. And then I scored that with 4 pieces to
Mm,
represent the 4 characters. And then so I would make demos and then I would send it to Hodge to put drums down and he'd send it to Watt for the bass part and then they'd send it back to me and I'd re-record that and then we'd do vocal stuff and that one our friend Petra Hayden joined us on vocals and violin. Um, so we kept busy and we kept making music. I mean, things change so much for artists, like the landscape of how to even the landscape of like how to make money as a musician has
yeah.
changed like tremendously in the couple of decades that I've been doing it, let
Mm,
alone the before that and the time before that, and who knows what's going to happen next. And so I think artists are really good at adapting and finding ways to continue to do what it is that we need to do, regardless of all the outside kind of unrelated forces that try to keep squashing us into these other little situations. I mean, this stuff
yeah.
has to get made. That's why we do it.
Mm.
So we keep adapting and finding ways to do it. So that was just another, in my view, another time where we had to figure out a new way to make it work. And that's what we tried to do.
And like that matter of the financial side of things is something that I am particularly interested in. So from your point of view, like when I look from the outside and I see that you've got 50 plus date tour, to me, I mean, particularly because you're with Mike Watt and he's like known for when he was with the Minutemen that they were touring around with Black Flag and that he's kind of like minimalist when it comes to the resources and like doing things without
Um,
spending an unnecessary amount of money. So I wonder, does a 50 plus date tour reflect that you've got quite an efficient way of doing this, that you can actually generate a decent amount of money? Or is it more you're playing this much because you just want to play?
Well, we do it because we want to play. If we didn't want to play, we could just stay home, you know. It'd be a lot easier. But no, it's really great to kind of like take the music to the town where the people live in and
Yeah.
play it for them, especially getting to go to places that are like maybe places that don't always get shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's really fun to play small towns, I think.
Hmm.
And then playing every night on a longer tour, I think that's really important. Like if you are going to be out for 7 or 8 or 9 weeks or whatever we've done, like at a certain point, it's it would be worse to take a day off. Absolutely, because you
Yeah.
have so much momentum going. If you play like 4 weeks in a row and then you have a night off, it would be like what? It'd be like 3 times as hard to start over again. Like just in the body, I think,
Hmm.
let alone, having to take a break from working on the music. So Yeah, I mean that yeah, it's definitely a Watt thing, but I love it, and that's the way that everybody wants to do it, and we've done it enough that we know how to make it work.
Yeah.
We don't have we don't have lights, and we don't carry our own sound person. We depend on the
Mm.
places we play to have their end together. They have shows every night at these venues we play, and so we just roll in. They know how to make the sound good and how to make the lights look good. We don't have to worry about all that stuff for what we do. So yeah, we've got it down pretty well. I've learned a lot from Watt. And every time we do it, I learn something new and I fix something and we try to hone it to be a little bit better for next time. So yeah.
And in terms of, like you mentioned that you like to go and play places that don't necessarily have loads of bands coming through. In terms of like the logistics of figuring out the actual venues you're going to play, is part of this coming from Mike Watt's kind of history of having played around the country, that he's got all of these different places? Like, do you have a tour manager? How do you find the right places to book shows at?
No, I booked a whole tour and I guess I'm kind of the tour manager. Some of the places we've played before, and you can have a good relationship with somebody who runs a club or somebody who books at a club.
Mm,
Or if you don't know anybody there, maybe you have friends in a band who have played there before, and you can email them and say, "Hey, I know you played this place before. Would you mind sharing their contact? And maybe I can get you on the bill or whatever, who knows?" But yeah, it's mostly word of mouth pretty much. Or sometimes people will come to a gig last year whenever we played and they say, "Boy, this is really, really cool, but you could play the town I live in too. There's this club. Here's the guy's number. I'll put you in touch."
mm,
So it's a lot of stuff like that. It's a lot of work to book it for sure.
yeah.
I try to pay a lot of attention to the route,
I
for
was just
driving.
thinking about that. Yeah. I mean, maybe
Of
that's another
course.
reason why having more shows can be a positive, because then you don't have to drive so far to get from
Oh
one place
yeah.
to the next.
If you want to go all the way around the country, you're going to need more than 3 weeks to do it,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big part. I mean, the logistics, just the reality of getting from here to here and back again, it's going to take so many miles. It's got to be done. So you might as well put shows in there
Yeah.
and hit the towns on the way through. But there's so many great places to play, and every town is like has something really cool about it. And there's really great bands everywhere that we get to play with and meet. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Is having a merch table important?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because I've
Where
spoken
else are
to,
people going to buy the record?
yeah, well, I mean, like I've spoken to bands who said that basically they feel like they're more t-shirt salesmen than anything else at this point in terms of what generates money. So like, do you sell a lot of t-shirts, or is it more the merch table for, actual music?
I feel like we're lucky. We sell all the stuff. People buy a lot of the records. We've got records from previous albums that have come out. We'll have 7 inches.
Mm,
Uh, Watt and Hodge, they bring some records from their own projects. I have some non-MSSV stuff there. And then the poster and the t-shirt usually has some kind of design from the record. So this record, our buddy John Herndon, amazing graphic artist, and
yeah.
also a great drummer. We were lucky enough to use some of his artwork for the album cover that's going to be on the t-shirt and the poster too. So, everything goes pretty good. We have a great helper with our band too, Miss Hiyori. She's like really awesome. She helps with load in. She helps run the merch table. She makes some videos for us. So she's a really key, important player in the band as well.
So you've got, when you're going around on the tour, you've got the four of you. Is that the full
Yep, that's
team?
it. Yep.
And yeah, in terms of the new album, what's it coming out on? Is it going to be on vinyl, CD?
It's on vinyl, and it's actually a different version on vinyl than you get from the digital tracks.
Okay.
So the best place is going to the MSSV Bandcamp page.
Hmm.
You can buy the digital downloads. It's 8 tracks, 8 songs, or you can order the vinyl, which will come with the digital version too. But the vinyl has each side is one long continuous track. So you have the same songs as the streaming or the downloads, but in between there's a bunch of little improvised interludes from the band um, that kind of call different aspects of some of the music you've heard and some of the music you haven't heard yet, and they kind of
Oh,
mix up in
cool.
between the songs to connect it into one sort of fever dream type of listening experience.
And where did you get the idea from to do that?
Well, I don't think it's a totally original idea, but when we were recording, the album, I had an idea for Hodges and Watt separately, not hearing each other, to record, just sort of improvise for like 20 or 30 minutes each, improvise music based on the parts for the songs that we had recorded.
Mm.
So maybe take a drum part from one song, but you could slow it down and sort of improvise with that as an idea, and then go into the drum part from another song, but just a different interpretation of it, maybe more dynamics or different speeds or no tempo. And the same thing for Watt with his bass parts. And then when I got home after the recording session, I had these long improvised tracks from each of them, and I would just listen to them for a while and kind of make a mental note, like, oh, that's kind of a really cool thing that he's playing here. Oh, maybe that would sound cool against this other thing that Hodges is playing. And then I would sit down and kind of edit them and put them together and split them up. And when I had something that was kind of like a little, a little piece, then I would kind of transcribe the bass and drum part, and then I would write a guitar part to go along with it. And then I'd kind of overdub that until it sort of has this interstitial music thing. And again, you can't, the idea is you don't really know what's happening. How composed is it? How improvised is it? Where did
Mm.
you come up with this stuff? And the cool part is that it's all based on music that's already on the record anyways, but it's
Yeah.
not totally apparent, which
Mm.
is which is kind of how I like things to be. So, like we talked about.
Yeah. No, that sounds really, really cool. Like you said, there's sort of like a dreamlike element to it. And I like as well the idea that you're going to be listening and you might hear something that's a callback, but you might also hear something that you're going to hear later, and then you hear the song and you go, hang on a minute, I
Yeah.
recognize this part already.
Well, the record's called On and On, and the idea is these things, these cyclical things that happen every day or every hour or every week or every lifetime or every generation, or there's things that are similar, and everything is kind of interconnected in a way. So I
Mm.
want the music to sort of be that. I mean, the music already is that, but I wanted the whole sort of project to have more of that element to it also.
Yeah.
When we play live, I don't like to stop in between songs and like, give some rap about like, oh, this song's about so and so and da 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 da. I just like to play. We come out and we start and we don't end until the show's over. So there's things that happen in between the songs, and that can be different all the time. But I think it's really important to the way I think about music, to do it that way. So I wanted the record to be a little bit more of that too.
And in terms of how you do construct a set, night by night, does that tend to evolve as the tour progresses, or like how fixed is it in terms of what you want to be playing specifically?
It's pretty fixed because it's a little easier on us, but usually we'll have a couple of different sets that will alternate every two or three shows. A
Mm.
lot of that has to do with the fact that I write new music that we're going to record at the end of the tour. And so the shows are kind of a way to practice that new music together in front of an audience every night so that by the time we
Oh, that's
record
cool.
it, yeah, it's like stuff that we have changed and is completely different from the way it started off as. I used to do a bunch of projects with other bands when I was younger, and I was in New York City around all these musicians. And a lot of times people would write all this amazing music, and you'd get together and rehearse it. And then you'd make a record. And then a year later, the record would come out, and you'd have to relearn all the music again. And you'd go play, 1 or 2 weeks of shows. And I always remember at the end of that being like, man, we should have made the record now. Like the music
Mm.
sounds so much more alive and
Yeah.
like personal, and everybody spent so much more time with it that the record kind of sounded, not always, but the record sort of had this feeling of like it's not really like as together as the music is now that we've played it a
Yep.
bunch more. So I always thought like, you should play the music a lot and then make the record.
Mm.
So that's what I try to do with this band all the time.
Yeah, I think I saw on your website actually that there was a post where you were saying that on the forthcoming tour you were going to be playing songs from On and On plus new songs. So I kind
Mhm.
of interpret that to mean, like as you're saying, that what will be for the next recording.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, anybody who's come to our shows and stuff we've done before is very familiar with that concept, hearing the record and then going like, "What are these songs?" And like, "Oh, we haven't made them yet, or we haven't recorded them yet." So yeah, we'll do that again this time.
And so you mentioned before how when you're writing these songs, you are actually writing drum parts and bass parts as well. So do you have a functioning drum kit? Do you play drums regularly?
No, but I put them on my keyboard. I have little MIDI drum sounds that I use, Lynch drum sounds or whatever, and Logic. I mean, I keep it pretty simple. I'm not like I'm not doing like crazy drum stuff, but
Yeah.
I just have, a couple cymbals, couple drums, kick, snare, some toms, some cymbals, and I'll think about what's going to go with the bass part or vice versa, or maybe the guitar parts first, and then I have to think about what kind of feel I
Mm,
want, what could be an interesting drum sound, or I'll get some ideas listening to, you know, listen to a Wipers album and hear something that's kind of really interesting and maybe try to come up with a different version of something that was inspiring that still rings true to what I think Hodges can sort of bring to the new music or whoever. So yeah, it's just keyboard drums and sometimes keyboard bass, or sometimes I'll put an octave pedal on the guitar when
mhm.
record it's that way.
How many guitars do you tend to take with you on the road when you're touring?
Just one, just one.
Just the one.
Yep.
That's proper minimalist.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I break a string, I can change it pretty quick. Or if I break a string, if I can't change it, then it makes for a real interesting set, about how things are going to go. There's been a couple of those for sure. I don't really break strings too much, but there's been a few times that people have seen. But yeah, I don't really think for what I do, it's not like, okay, I mean, I like playing acoustic and 12 string and all this stuff, but like
Yeah.
it's just four of us in a van. There's not really like time to do all that. And
Yeah.
the more I do it, the more I get into how many different kind of sounds can I get on this one instrument,
Mm,
and not even like really apparent things like changing the pickups or different effect pedals but also just kind of how can I play the string. If I play back towards the bridge with a lighter touch, it's a totally different sound than if I play towards the neck with a heavier touch. I mean, that kind of stuff, you can get so many different exciting things happening. And that's always
yeah.
been the way I've approached playing the instrument in music, I think, anyways. When I look back on it, like how you actually interact with the instrument has always been a real important part of my music.
I think that's a really great point, actually. Like, I know for myself, and I'm not really in any way an accomplished guitarist. Like, I've been playing for a long, long time, but just at a very
Right.
basic level. But I know that in the past, there were times where I got carried away and went like, oh, I can have these different effects pedals and I can use different guitars. And kind of to your point, there's a lot that you can explore just with one instrument and the nuances of how you play it without getting distracted by a lot of different
Yeah.
potential equipment that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love guitars and effects, and I'm way into it. I would love to bring everything with me on the road and like not miss anything. But it is a really cool challenge to see what you can do with limitate. I mean, limitations for an artist are like a gift,
Yep.
If you have no limitations to what you can do. And I mean, this is really just from my perspective, but for me, it makes it so much more difficult to figure out what you're going to do. But if
Yep.
you have a couple of limitations, boom, then you've got a canvas. And
Yes.
the canvas is this big. And and then you can go to work and make anything you want in that. But
Mm,
if okay, I've got 7 colors and I've got a 10 by 10 canvas. Oh, great. You've got a great starting point. So I can think about songs that way, or I can think about the limitations of tour that way.
mm,
And it makes me feel more creative, knowing that I have these certain constraints to work with. So I kind of actually really like that.
yeah. Yeah. And even with whatever the constraints are like that, there's still so much that you can do within that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, there's not really rules. It's not, I don't think about them as rules. I guess you could, but I think about them as sort of like,
Parameters, maybe.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, like we live on Earth, so that's it. Like I've got to breathe air. We've got to
Yeah.
drink water. It would be cool if people would keep that stuff clean, but whatever, I guess. So there's certain things that you have to deal with,
Mm,
but I can still think about whatever I want to. I just have to make sure that I drink water and breathe air. It's kind of, I don't really think those are rules. They're just sort of like realities of the thing that you have to work with, and then it
yeah.
gives you all the time to do anything else around that.
And I was wondering, from a lyrical point of view, I mean, or it's kind of like partly your vocal style on the album. There were a couple of tracks I'd say particularly like On Its Face seemed to have a bit of a sort of a beat poet aspect to it. Is that something that's been an influence for you lyrically?
I don't know that I didn't really think that it was, but people do tell me that, and I realize like, yeah, I've read a lot of those guys and listened to a lot of their recordings for sure. So yeah, I could see that being like a subliminal influence. I used to get hit a lot with the guitar playing of like the surf thing, like, oh, he's got a lot of that surf guitar sound. And I had never really listened to like any surf guitar before people started telling me that. It's just sort of maybe a bright tone with the whammy bar going, and people go like, "Oh yeah, shadows." But I'd never heard any of that stuff before people were telling
Yeah.
me that. So I'd go back and I started listening to Hank Marvin and stuff and going like, "Oh yeah, there is." I could hear that for sure. So sometimes I don't think about it until people tell me, but
Mm.
it's not an overt thing, but I can see that being an influence for sure. I mean, vocally, big influences for me are Kim Gordon and
Hmm.
Bob Dylan, I think, in certain ways. Not really so much like an overt thing, but just the natural kind of tough, confident delivery, and maybe not so concerned with rhythm and pitch per se,
Th-
But if I had to pick one vocalist or somebody who's like, who is your biggest vocal influence, I would say Kim Gordon for
that's
sure.
really interesting. Like I was actually speaking to another musician recently where we were sharing our love of Sonic Youth, and that was one of the first bands I really fell in love with when I was a teenager, and it really
Yeah.
opened my mind up in terms of what you can do
Oh
with a
yeah.
guitar. And there
Yeah.
were bits of the album where I thought like, oh, there's like a little bit of a reminder of maybe Sonic Youth, like not necessarily any specific kind of melodies, but I just sort of got a bit of a flavor of them from time to time.
Well,
Um,
again, it's just listening to them so much. I'm sure, I'd be lying if I was saying that there was no way any of that was in my music. I mean, you're talking about one of my favorite bands. So yeah, of course there's some of that in there. I never set out to try to remake a version of something, but I'm also not naive enough to think that any person is an island without influence.
and do you tend to play or do you tend to write in standard tuning?
Yeah, I'm not a big alternate tuning guy. It's like really confusing to me, actually. The craziest I would ever get is going to tuning the low string down to a D if I really want to get drony
Yeah.
and D. But I spent so much time trying to learn how to play guitar with regular tuning that when I change it, it's just like, I can change it and come up with something interesting by feeling my way out and hearing my way out. But
Yeah.
then it's like, speaking of Sonic Youth, like, what am I going to bring like 20 guitars on the road and like so each one can be tuned differently? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. So what I have done times, I'll detune something and just sort of play around if I'm looking for ideas. Oh, and here's a really interesting sound. What is that? I'll figure out what the notes are, and then I'll put the guitar back in standard tuning, and then I'll figure out how to play that in standard tuning, which can lead to some really like awkward hand stuff. But
Yeah.
you can usually make anything work, for the most part.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I never really thought of that kind of reverse engineering before because I've done that where I've detuned the guitar and I've fiddled around and I've gone, oh, this is something quite cool. And then
Yeah.
I might record it and go like, oh well, I'm never going to play that because that's in this completely obscure tuning. But that's a
Yeah,
nice
but
idea.
if you figure out the notes, okay, it's an A and a C sharp and a D and a B and another G or whatever, it can
Yeah,
look all out. But then if you put it back into standard tuning, even if you can't play that exact thing, you can kind of like get the kernel of what was so cool about it and
yeah,
still try to get some of it in standard tuning. And then you end up with something different again that you wouldn't have found either way, and you wouldn't have got with the alternate tuning. So it's like kind of two levels removed,
mm.
so you can still find really cool stuff that way. And then you have to practice kind of interesting hand things that maybe you didn't have to do before, and that can lead to other stuff. So there's all there's endless ways to learn new stuff on your own, I think. Anybody who's bored with an instrument is like not thinking about it the right way, I think.
And do you come from a background? I imagine that you do come from a background where you did a lot of music theory.
I did, yeah. Well, my dad plays guitar, and so he was the first person who taught me anything on guitar. He'd show me chords, C and G, and little melodies and stuff. And then I kind of knew I had to go to college, so I found out you could go to college for music. And so I thought like, oh, I guess I'll do that. And so I did that. So I went to Rutgers in New Jersey. They had a great music school, and I had some awesome really incredible teachers there in the way that they kind of taught me, they sort of taught me ways to figure out how to teach me how to sound like myself when I really look back on it,
Hmm.
which is not always what people think about when they think about having a music teacher. So I think I got really lucky with a lot of that. And then I tried to stop playing music for a while, and that didn't go so well. And I kept playing music, and then yeah, I mean, I really like when you sometimes there's a danger of this though, like you hear something really interesting and you want to know what it is, right? So you figure out how to learn about it, and then maybe you learn what it is, and then you learn how to do it, and then you learn how to use this thing, and now you have access to this harmonic tool. But then some of the danger is that the mystery can be gone a little bit.
Mm.
So then maybe it loses some of its excitement. So then you have to find something else that to hear that's, oh, that's new and interesting. What is that? And then you learn about it and then you can use it and you have this other tool and then you know about it. And it's really cool to know about that stuff. But I also really like that feeling of like not knowing what is happening, what is going on right now. That's really exciting to me. And I've found ways to kind of keep that feeling throughout music these days, which is good. But I had to kind of unlearn how to do that
Mm.
a little bit. And I'm not saying that like learning music theory or learning how to read music is bad. I think it's totally amazing and great. And I think if you're a musician, it's worth thinking about if you don't know how to do that stuff. I think it's totally cool. But it's also really important to know that that's not like the only way to do something meaningful in music.
Yep.
There's so much music that's incredible to me, and I'm sure the person doing it has no idea about some of those types of things. They
Mm.
know what they're doing and they can do it and they know why they like it, and that's good enough a lot of times.
Yeah. And thinking about the lyrical side of things, so how do you approach writing lyrics? Do you do writing separate from music, or do you tend to approach writing as always being towards a song of some description?
Well, it's that's still kind of new for me. That really just started on one of those mssv 7 inches over lockdown. I've always loved music with words, like like it's kind of hard not to hear music with words. So it's not like I'm against it. I remember I had a teacher when I was younger, like my early teens, and he was a guitar teacher. And I remember, this was early when I was trying to learn guitar. Not my dad, somebody else after that. And then I was learning a song and I played it in my lesson or whatever. And I was like, hey, check this out. And I played and I sang it. And I think at the end it was something like, yeah, well, guitar part sounds really good, but maybe no more singing. And so little Mike was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll never sing again. And that kind of was exactly what happened. I just thought singing was something for singers, and I was just a guitar player. But I would still kind of try it. I'd learn songs and I'd try to do it on my own and stuff. And then on the Scott Eicher EP,
Mm.
I remember I wrote that little screenplay about the four characters and I sent it to Watt and I was like, hey, can you write some lyrics for some of these? And he goes, sure. What are they about? So I sent him my little story. And then when he sent the vocal track back a couple of days later, I was listening to it. I was like, oh man, these words are great, but they're kind of familiar. And I went and I saw the words I sent him, and it was pretty much just what I'd sent him. He'd finessed it and made him kind of fit better and stuff, but it was pretty much what I wrote. And so I was sitting there going like, oh, I can write lyrics. It's just this. And I asked those guys if they'd mind if I tried singing some with them, and they were kind of very supportive and also wondering why I hadn't been singing this whole time, because it had been built up as this big deal to me from that one
Yeah.
early interaction, but it's not really a big deal. If you want to write a song, you can do whatever you want. There's no rules. So yeah, in hindsight, it's kind of ridiculous it took me this long, but it also was really helpful to have the support of those guys. And Watt, particularly as a vocalist, has been like super, super helpful with all kinds of really great ideas about how to use your face and your nose and your voice and your throat and your body. And then Hodge, of course, he's played drums with some of the greatest vocalists of the 20th century. So, I mean, to have him there with that support too, it's like really kind of has spoiled me. But I've gotten more comfortable writing words, but I try not to get too precious about it. If I sit down and I go, okay, I'm going to write the greatest song of my generation, I mean, it's never going to get written. So a
Yeah.
lot of times I have an idea for a song or I have an idea for a character that I want to that has something that would be interesting to put into a song, or an experience in my past, or on and on. There's a song called "Careful What You Wish For" that's written for Watt's friend Jer Trebedich, the drummer, who took a face plant at work and like crushed his nose while we were on tour. I took these heinous pictures of him and stuff. So I was thinking like, oh man, what would that story sound like in a song, you know? So there's all kinds of things you can write songs about. A lot of the songs on and on, there's just the basic idea is that it's just sort of regular stuff that could happen to anybody, really. And my
Yeah.
idea of some of that, it's not, I don't want to get too precious about anything, I guess.
And you mentioned Careful What You Wish For. I noticed it sounded like there was a different vocalist on that for part of it. Was that Mike Watt that's singing part of that?
Watt sings the middle part, yeah.
Yeah. And then I was wondering as well on Boat Song, it sounded like there was another voice. Is that Stephen Hodges?
There's some backups where they both sing. Boy, I forget the words now. I got to remember these soon since we're about to hit the road. They can't take that away from me, right? But yeah, so both Watt and Hodge will do backups with me, and sometimes Watt has his own parts that he'll sing.
Yeah. And thinking about the logistics of it, now that you are singing and getting comfortable singing, what has that kind of meant for the coordinating when you're playing at the same time?
Just that I had to practice being able to do it more. Playing the guitar and singing at the same time is not really like super easy. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to do like a finger picking thing and your words come in, and a lot of times my words, I don't want them to sound like stiff and rhythmic. It just should be
Yeah.
very kind of loose and conversational in some ways. So trying to kind of have that happen here while this sort of thing is actually set has been an interesting kind of challenge. But it's just about doing it. You know, I mean, I think it would be really hard to try to think about both things and how they connect. So I work more on trying to just separate the two things entirely so that I can just have this going and I can have this going and I can split my brain up between them rather than trying to think like, okay, this note, this word comes in on the second beat of this pattern like that. I
Yeah.
can't do. Maybe some people think like that, but for me, I have to spend a lot of time actually separating the two instruments more.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I kind of imagine I've never played drums, but I feel like people who can play drums have got the capacity to sort of have parallel coordination. So I suppose you don't necessarily have to be a drummer to do that. It's something you could train just if you are singing and playing guitar together, for example.
Yeah, I don't know. Drummers are like a whole other thing to watch. Yeah, I know. Because sometimes you'd watch a great drummer and you'd think like, man, they must know how everything is interconnected. And they may, I don't know, I'm not a drummer, but maybe they don't, like you're saying too. I know for me, when I try to sing and play, I don't want to know how they're interconnected. I mean, I know when I'm supposed to come in and this and that, but
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about all that intricacy. That would like really freak me out.
Yeah, I know that. I guess that's like when you're in a sort of like a flow state, so to speak, and then you actually go like, "Oh, hang on a minute, I'm in flow." Like, "Oh shit, now I'm not."
Yeah, you know about that book.
Um, I would possibly. I did some. I studied psychology a while ago, and we did some stuff on flow. So I think it may have originated from the book, but I don't actually remember what the original source was. Who
Yeah,
who was that?
the name is really hard to spell, but it's pronounced Chickmyhai. It's like
Okay.
Csikmyhaili or something. But the book is called Flow. And I remember when I somebody turned me on to that book and I read it and I was like, oh, this is that this is another way of talking about that thing that I experience, whether it's in music or in meditation or
Mm,
between dreaming and waking up. That's that spot that I always want to be in.
yep.
You know, there's different ways people have come up with for explaining that. But yeah, that's kind of what I would it's that's what I kind of got into music for because sometimes I you can play music and you can get into that state, trance, whatever, right? But the reality when you're trying to like go on tour and play guitar and sing and you're not I'm not in the flow state as much as I would like to be, but I always try to get there, I think is what I'm
Yeah.
thinking about.
Yeah, no, it definitely, like you say, whatever you want to call it, whether it's being in a trance or whether it's flow, or whether you describe it with some other terminology, it does feel like something kind of transcendent whether you're tapping into something or whether you're reaching something, it's a really kind of a beautiful thing when you feel like you've managed to do that.
Yeah, it's about making something bigger than yourself and doing it with other people and then taking other people into that thing and giving them that idea to experience that with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I've noticed, as well as this big US tour coming up, you're also going to be coming to Europe, and you're going to be coming just down the road from me. You're going to be coming to Glasgow. So
Yes.
I've stuck it in my calendar. For
Great.
the European dates, like, did you have a separate booking agent for this? Like, how familiar are you with booking tours outside the US?
For me, none at all. We had a lot of help from Jack Knopman at Rand Touring and Owain at Hapless Museum Work. Those guys
So,
were really important in setting this up. I set up maybe two of the shows myself just to fill in a couple of off dates. But
and
but
would
yeah,
you
those
be,
guys they know the whole scene over there. So
yeah. I presume that this is not your first time that you'll be playing in the UK and in some parts of Europe.
this is my third time only. So I haven't done a lot of it. I have been there before for sure. So I'm excited to see it. I've never played this many shows in the UK before. It's only been maybe two or three and then on to somewhere else. So I think we have like 13 shows in the UK and then four shows in Ireland. So I'm really
Yeah,
excited to see
it's
all these
very, very
places.
cool. And I was
Yeah, a
impressed as
lot,
well
a lot
because,
of
like,
towns will be the first time for me.
yeah, like to your point, what you were saying before about going around the US and not having a day off where you lose momentum. I was looking at the European going like, wow, you're basically, I think I found one day off, I think, in the whole European part. Maybe you just have a
No,
longer,
we had one, but I filled it. We're going to Aberdeen that day.
you're going to Aberdeen.
Yeah.
Oh, I lived in Aberdeen for 10 years.
Oh, well, come up to that one too.
I should come to that would actually, yeah, no, I should definitely come up to that one. How
Right.
is
That's
that
both of
like?
our Scotland shows. We only have those two.
That's awesome. No, I have to do that then because I don't go back up to Aberdeen
Great.
often enough.
Now you
That's
have a
super
perfect
cool.
reason.
Excellent. And just wrapping up with a couple of questions about the actual release of the record. So it's Big Ego Records, who I think you've released with before. What's
Yeah.
generally the best way for people to get hold of the album? I think you mentioned Bandcamp
Yeah, if
before.
you go to mssv.bandcamp.com, you'll find it there. My friend Chris Schlarb, great musician, great producer, studio maven. It's his studio, Big Ego Studios in Long Beach, we record at. And so this is the record label for his productions that come out of there, Big Ego Records. But they also do a really cool subscription series for the label. So you can pay like one price at the beginning of the year, and then however many albums they put out. I think it's at least four, but sometimes as many as eight records. They just, when the new record comes out that year, you get them on a subscription for the year. I always thought that was
Super
a
cool.
really cool idea. I don't know if people
Yeah.
are doing it, but I
Yeah,
would be doing
I know one or two labels. I think there's an Italian label called Avant-Garde Music that's
it. Oh
more
yeah.
kind of, I think they
Yeah.
do a subscription thing as well where you can get
I
the,
think it's a cool idea. It's really important to not be like sucked into this streaming thing all the time because,
yes.
it's like, well, it's like I still have a website, right?
Yep.
And actually, for anybody that's into this idea, I still have a RSS feed hooked up to my website.
Okay.
Because I think if you depend solely on social media, it's really not a good idea because you don't have control over any of that. Like it's controlled by this whatever. It's too much to get into. It's way too much to get into now over here. But if somebody shuts this thing down, what? All your stuff is gone?
Yep.
Or somebody hacks you or impersonates. So if you have like a little area where you can control your thing and you can own some of this thing, you have a way to provide it to people through their email or it's like buying a record or buying a download. That's great. If you just stream like, okay, maybe Spotify gets blown up or whatever, and then all your music's gone. Like, what do you? I don't know. I think it's really important to have other ways to kind of access community, especially now. So it's just something to think about.
Totally. No, I mean, I really love it when artists and bands have got their own websites because it does feel like something that has its own contain value rather
Yeah,
than
but a
just
lot
being
of people
ephemeris.
don't have an RSS thing hooked up to it anymore.
You are the first person
Yeah,
that
I
I've spoken to
think
that's
you
mentioned
know how
that.
things go like retro every like 20 years, you know, like Polaroid
Yeah.
cameras came back and then like CDs came back. I think the RSS feed is going to be the next like big retro movement in like 5 or 10 years. So mark my words. You heard it here first.
So the mikebaggetta.com is your website, and I see actually you've got a link to MSSV as well. So that just
Yeah, there's
directs
also
people directly there.
mainstreamstopvalve.com.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so people can also order the music directly from your websites too.
You can, but you can, and it'll click through and take you to the Bandcamp
Oh, it'll
site.
just directly link over to Bandcamp.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yeah.
good.
But
All
we'll have
right.
records at the shows and stuff too. So if people are going to come out to the shows, you can grab them there.
Yeah. And as much as I do, like, we're almost the same age, so I think I have similar misgivings about social media, but I think MSSV does actually have a Facebook page. Is that
Yeah, we
kind
do.
of,
Yeah.
is it worth steering people towards that as well?
I sort of think like if that's the way they want to do things, then we're there. I think there's good things about it. Don't get me wrong. Like it's a great way to reconnect and stay connected with people in certain ways. But like anything else, there's two sides to every coin. So
Yeah. Well, Mike, it was great to talk to you
you too,
and
Tom.
really enjoyed On and On. And I hope it gets a great reception when it comes out. And I'll see you in Glasgow and I'll see you in Aberdeen.
Yeah, I'll see you in Scotland. Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Excellent. All
Cheers,
the best.
man. Bye.
Spend a life wondering just what to do. I wanna try my best, see what I can do. When the time comes, I'll still be next to you. 'Cause I never had a dream like what I live with you. On and on. On and on. On and on. On and on. How am I gonna know if I can never choose? I wanna stay ahead, I wanna keep it loose. But what if I don't ever get to know the truth? Well, it doesn't really matter, 'cause we're gonna lose. On and on. All goes on and on. On and on. All goes on and on. All I want is a seat at your table. I help you over the bridge when I'm able. All I want is a seat at your table.